Hello friends and welcome back to House of Props. I haven't made a diorama in a while, and a friend of mine who was a big fan of the original Lost in Space TV series is having a birthday, so I thought I'd make him a little diorama just for this occasion. It features a 3D printed Jupiter 2 and a B-9 robot, and it has a concealed LED lights in it so that the ship can actually light up. Let me show you the process that I used to make this. Let's get started. After all the pieces finished printing, I drilled a hole in the bottom piece so I could run this string of LED Christmas lights through it. For the ship, I'm using these bright white lights because they have a slight bluish hue to them. For the middle ring of the ship, I'm attaching a small piece of plastic over the windows so the light can shine through. I'm using CA glue, and once I have the plastic positioned correctly, I cure the glue instantly with a few drops of zip kicker. Then the middle piece can be glued to the bottom. While I attach them together, I would appreciate it if you would click the subscribe button if you haven't already, and feel free to click the notification bell so you can be notified when new projects are released. The middle of the ship has two porthole looking holes in it, so I attached an LED into each of these with some CA glue. The rest of the lights can be coiled up inside, and the top piece of the ship can be aligned and glued on. And on the very top, the small dome plug can fill the last opening. Once everything is glued together, I check just to make sure that everything still lights up properly and there are no crimps in the wires. Since everything still works at this point, the three legs can be attached to the bottom. With everything attached, we can begin to clean up the surface before painting. I taped a plastic baggie around the battery pack to ensure that it will be kept clean, and the windows and the portholes have had tape applied to cover the windows and the LEDs. To start the cleanup, I fill in the seam with some glazing and spot putty. I'm applying a rather generously thick layer to make sure that the gap is evenly filled. Once the putty's dry, it can be smoothed with some 180 grit sandpaper. And once it's smooth, the entire ship can be sprayed with some 2-in-1 filler and sandable primer. For this project, I'm going to use 3 layers to make sure it hides the print lines. While that dries, I'm going to start building up the base. I start with an 8-inch and 9-inch diameter circles of XPS foam. In the middle of the 8-inch circle, I cut out a rectangle to allow the battery pack to slip through later on, but make sure to keep this piece because it will be used to fill the hole back in. The 9-inch circle has a hole cut to allow the battery pack to sit comfortably on its side. This will hide the pack and allow the display to sit flat. The 2 circles are glued together with tacky glue. If you use CA glue, it will eat into the surface of the foam and destroy it. Plus, tacky glue allows you to adjust placement for a while because it will take about 2 hours to thoroughly dry. In order to hold it in place as it dries, you can secure it with some T-pins. To create some dimension on the surface, I'm adding some rock shapes that were carved from the same XPS foam, and they can be glued down with the tacky glue. Once the tacky glue has dried, we can start to add texture to the 8-inch circle. I thin some of the tacky glue with some water and brush this onto the circle, but not the rocks. And while it's still wet, pour some sand onto it. Make sure to thoroughly cover the surface. Tap the base to make sure that the glue is thoroughly covered, and the tapping will knock off any excess sand. When the circle is completely covered with sand, I add texture to the rocks with some Kwik Seal. I just use a palette knife to smear it on and make sure to completely cover the XPS, because the Kwik Seal will be easier to paint than the XPS foam. Once all that is finished, set the base to the side to allow the glue and the Kwik Seal time to dry. Now we can move back to the Jupiter 2. With the 2-in-1 primer dry, we can start to sand the surface with some 400 grit sandpaper. The sanding will just help smooth the surface and hide the print lines. Once sanded, the ship can be sprayed with some glossy black spray paint. This will help the metallics to pop later. When the black is dry, spray the ship with some metallic silver. One even coat should be enough for this project, you just want to make sure it's completely covered. With the ship out of the way for now, the 8-inch circle and the rocks can be based with a tan created by mixing white with some burnt umber and a little cadmium yellow. While the tan is still wet, thin some burnt umber with a little water and brush this into spots around the rocks and on the rocks. This will start to create some depth in the paint job. Next, repeat the same process with some burnt sienna. Burnt sienna can be a bit bright, so use it sparingly and blend it evenly to avoid unnatural looking edges. The tape and the baggie can be removed from the ship. One quick test to make sure the lights still function and the battery pack can be slid through the hole in the base. Now the ship can be attached to the base with CA glue. We can use the CA glue now because the foam has a layer of paint on it and the glue can't make contact with the foam. Now the small plug foam piece can be glued back in place and then covered with glue, then sand, and then paint. Since the battery pack has a removable lid, I glue the back of the pack into the bottom hole with some hot glue. This way the switch and everything else will still be accessible. Now, the ship is too shiny looking, so I age up the surface by taking some charcoal gray and pounce this across the surface. Then dab and blend the gray with a paper towel to make it more subtle. Some of the gray can be dry brushed around the edges just to add another layer of aging detail. To make the trees, I'm using some tree roots I found that have a nice twisted look to them. I glue them in place with some CA glue and set the glue instantly with Zip Kicker. The landscape in the show has a little greenery growing around the rocks, so I'm using some green paper cut into small leaf shapes to create these. These are glued in clumps and will resemble ferns. For the full detail process of making greenery with paper, check out my other terrain builds. To break up the green of the paper, I brush some olive green onto the ferns. This will also help hide the white edges where the paper has been cut. Then I repeat the process with some marsh green just to get some natural variation happening. To add a little something to the display, I printed a B-9 robot to scale and sprayed it with some metallic silver spray paint. Then the detail was painted on with some gray, white, yellow, and red. I left him on his base while I was painting because it just made it easier to hold and handle. Once he dried, I popped him off his base and glued him in the front near the ship. And finally, the 9-inch circle could be painted with some matte black. And there you have it, a diorama featuring the Jupiter 2 and the B-9 robot from the original Lost in Space TV series. Here we can see it lit by the studio lights and what it looks like when the lights are turned off. So what are your thoughts on the original Lost in Space series? Let me know in the comments below. And if you like this project, please give it a thumbs up, share it with friends and family, and subscribe to House of Props. And remember, if you are building any of my builds or using any of my templates, feel free and tag me at House of Props on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, because I would really like to see your fantastic work. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.